Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to some of you that are west of us that are on the East Coast. My name is Tim Noka. I'm helping Nasser to run this webinar today. Our expert in ITIL for today's webinar is Nasser El-Batel. Nasser has been doing consulting and training and coaching in the IT industry for almost 30 years. He does have quite a focus on ITIL. Nasser has several certifications within ITIL. He has been in the advisory role for many large organizations and international organizations and government agencies and things like that. He's done ITSM audits within several of those. He's been a trainer with ProTech for many, many years. We've been working with Nasser and have great respect for him and are very happy that he's taken the opportunity today to do this webinar on ITIL latest version. A little bit of ground rules if I could. If anybody out there has any questions at all, please do not hesitate to put them into the question area. And what we're going to do is collect them up and we will answer them in batch at 20 after the hour and 40 after the hour. Go ahead, Nasser. It's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Good afternoon, everyone. So this webinar will shed some light on ITIL 4, the new version. I'm sure many of you were anxiously waiting for some information about that. As I have been involved with ITIL for many years, I know every 7 or 8 years there is a new introduction that comes to the market, and of course with that there are a lot of changes and a lot of clarifications along the way that needs to be put out there for people to be familiar with what Axelos and PeopleCert are introducing. As you can tell, if you are familiar with the topic, Axelos is the accreditor organization for ITIL, and PeopleCert is the what we call examination institute for ITIL, and they're the only one that has this role nowadays in the industry. In the past, there used to be many of them, and eventually they basically focused them all into one organization that does that and give them monopoly of the examination practice. And as you are aware, there are PeopleCert that do that. So we're going to talk a little bit about the reality of the industry today, why we are introducing ITIL, and what is ITIL, what are the benefits associated with ITIL, some of the elements associated with the new version of ITIL. Of course, we're going to talk a little bit about ITIL education, certifications, and how, again, the new version is going to affect that, especially for those who are currently certified in one or more areas of the subject matter. And of course, at the end of the session, we'll try as much as we can to answer any questions that you might have. I'm not going to spend much time about me. This is just to show you how pretty I am. And yes, I have been in the industry for almost 3 decades in different capacities. My subject matter expertise focused on best practices in general. So ITIL is the main knowledge. And then, of course, there is enterprise architecture, there is DevOps, Agile, Lean, all the known suspects in the industry. So this is just to give you an idea about me and for you to know that, I can pretend to know what I'm talking about. So today in the industry, as you very well experienced in your organizations or your partners' organizations, your clients, your providers, everybody is somewhat complaining about slow responses, complaining about waste, complaining about return on investments or lack thereof, complaining about services that are not being provided on time or as planned. So with all of this, best practices, come in with a big blue vest and a red cape to save the day. Well, not quite, because even though you may have best practices introduced into the organization, if this best practice or set of best practices are not well integrated, then you're not really going to reap the benefits, right? So this is one of the actual very important reasons as to why ITIL has been refreshed every 7 or 8 years. For those of you who are familiar with ITIL, currently, before the introduction of ITIL 4, the last ITIL version was what we call ITIL v3. I call it 3.1 because there is a difference between v3 was introduced in 2006 and 3.1, which was introduced in 2011. So from 2011 till today, you've got approximately 8 years of a gap between what the industry was and what the industry is today. And this brings in some of the problems, not only in the subject matter, but also in transition that you are implementing within your organization. So the staff may be reactive. You have the term, for those of you who are familiar with Scrum and Agile, there is the term of technical debt, right? Or the term associated with velocity. In other words, technical deficiencies and lack of capacity, to speak plain English, right? But these terms, as you can see, also are associated, as I said, with DevOps, with Agile. So the new ITIL, in a way, is trying to align and integrate with all of those. The business side historically have seen IT as an expense, even though IT is a strategical partner in business success. But because IT was always late, or was always behind, or was not supporting, or was not part of the kind of the strategic direction of the organization, over time it became an expense. So you don't do a good job at IT, I'll outsource, and I'm done with you. Well, not everybody can do that in that level of simplicity. So this is why we need to really take a look at what the problems are from both, as we say, technical side and the business side, and try to figure out how we can bridge the gap with where the business wants to go, not only strategically, but also in terms of best practices. So when we're talking about mature businesses or mature organizations, there are certain characteristics associated with that. Things, as an example, relevant to accountability. Things relevant to not just showing a good value proposition, but actually delivering that value proposition. Things associated with what I call vertical and horizontal alignment and integration. In other words, again, in simple language, you don't want to be working in a vertical silo where you may have 3 or 4 different line of businesses, but no one talking to nobody else. Or you have 20 processes, but none of them is talking to the next process. This is a great deal of deficiency within the business. So from a business point of view, it is critical that we integrate the IT role within the business direction. Because I give you a very simple example. If IT is not aware of your strategic plan, then very simply, they're not going to have enough capacity for you to actually accomplish that vision. And then you point the finger at them and you say, it's your fault. Well, not really. It's the business fault in this case. So from a business point of view, it's very important that we have a good understanding as to what kind of strategic benefits IT and best practices in general will bring in, but also what strategic benefit ITIL specifically will enable or will bring into the organization. Service management, as we all know, is very simply about 2 main aspects: introducing a service and managing a service. But how are you going to do this? Well, if you take a look at the bottom of the screen, we're talking about a balancing act between the stability of your IT environment, the stability of your services, in other words, versus the ability and the agility to deliver these services on an ongoing basis. So when we're talking about velocity, we're talking here about how much work can you deliver within a specific period of time, and how agile as an organization you can be to support and to enable your client base. So things, as an example, when we're talking about services in general, right? Services are associated with your customer's business needs. The customer is looking for a value, and that value is enabled by the services that you offer. Those services are supported by technology and by resources. So the technology that we're talking about is evolving almost on a daily basis. So a couple of days ago, we started to hear about blockchain. A number of years ago, and like, we're not talking here ancient history, we're talking about 3, 4, 5 years ago, this is where we started to hear, cloud, and before you know it, cloud took over the world, right? Machine learning in our days, Internet of Things in our days. So all of this becomes an enablement for the services that you are offering. So your service management capability becomes that strategic enabler to your business success in our days, especially with the digital world and how important it is to every business. When we're talking about ITIL, for those of you who are not familiar, historically speaking, ITIL is very basic common sense, and we all agree and we all know it and we all nod our head for it, but none of us would follow it. And there are a couple of things that you have to be careful with from an implementation point of view, but this could be a different discussion, we might have in the future. ITIL is, as an acronym, what we call Information Technology Infrastructure Library. So the term library is inherited historically to the subject matter, because today it's a little bit different. So it's a common language, it's a common focus. When you speak a common language, you provide a common focus to the organization. It's holistic, it's irrelevant whether you are a hospital or a government or a manufacturer or a bicycle shop or whatever it is that your business products and services are, or what the business outcome should be. You can still use ITIL best practices in improving and doing best-in-class IT service management. Pretty quickly, from a historical point of view, ITIL was introduced in the mid-80s by the UK government at the time for the UK government. And there was a lot of different books at the time. So here we're talking about 10 core books. It was introduced as a function rather than a process-based approach. Eventually, in the 90s, it transformed into a process-based approach, and early 2000, it was introduced to two main books, what we call service support and service delivery. So this is the first attempt to become process-based. Not too long after that, in 2007, as I mentioned a bit earlier, in 2011, version 3 was introduced, because version 2 in 2000 was introduced as a process focus. So the industry kind of looked at that as more vertical approach. So in 2007, 2011, they introduced version 3, and as I said, version 2001, in an attempt to have a service life cycle flow, and that was great. Unfortunately, the industry still looked at each one of these phases that comprised the life cycle as a stovepipe phase, even though it was not, and it is not, but the perception, it was that. And eventually, as they introduced version 4 today, they are now following, as you're going to see, what we call a service value system, a service value chain. The processes are no longer called processes, they're called practices. There is an integration, there is collaboration, if you wish, with other recent best practices, being it Lean or DevOps or Agile. So all of those, were leveraged in the new knowledge. And of course, we're hoping that this actually is going to take the IT industry to the next step and or the next phase of, in quote, the digital world. Why do we need to change? Why do you need to refresh any best practice every few years? Give you an example. I mean, we're talking about ITIL now, and let's call it a gap between 2011 and almost 19, 8 years or so. But the same story if you look at TOGAF for enterprise architecture, right? With that, there's a 10 years gap between the most recent version of the best practice. So it's not just because we want to change, it's when the change becomes almost, I don't want to call it mandatory, it's when the change becomes necessary to align with everything else that's happening in the industry. So you want to be consistent. You want to be able to work with all of these other best practices. And by the way, if you take a look at any of these titles, the names, DevOps, Agile, Lean, they're all from the same source. It's all the same stream. What ITIL brings in here is the glue to all of these different best practices, because ITIL, as a matter of fact, provides the foundational set of processes and practices to enable all of these other, as you call them, I don't want to call them models, so let's continue to call them best practices or in some cases methodologies. So without ITIL, they wouldn't be successful either, right? It's a two-way relationship. Also, when we're talking about the speed of execution, ITIL wants to align with the mentality of agility. It wants to align with the mentality of the ability to deliver an ongoing business value. So even though they talk about it repeatedly throughout almost all their publications over the years, but now, as we say, the proof is in the pudding, because you have something called Agile and you have something called DevOps. So now the ITIL folks are more pressed to show that this is actually like they walk the walk, right? Understanding services, service value chains, understanding and minimizing the technical debt, the cultural debt, looking at some cultural guidance as to how you need to behave internally. Give you an example. Anyone who introduced and or implemented ITIL over the years, it doesn't really matter from version 1 to where we are today, realizes that, you know what, the cultural side is a critical success factor of the implementation. And if you ignore that, it's not going to work out for you. Believe me, I've been doing this for a long time. And besides all the technical, in quote, when we talk about processes and tools and automation and all of this good stuff, part of your people consideration, there is the culture change that you have to keep in mind.
Hey, Nasser. At this point, I have one question, and I will front it with a comment. I wonder if the cultural change might be the most difficult out of all the challenges that you're talking about there. That's something that just jumped out to me. But anyway, our question is, if I'm certified in a previous version of ITIL, do I need to be certified for ITIL 4?
Let's answer the cultural question or comment first, and the short answer is yes. Organizational change is one of the most challenging change, even more the cultural change itself, because it does not happen overnight. It does not happen as an on-off switch. And you will have quite a bit of resistance along the way. So the short answer to that is absolutely yes. And this is why you need to ensure that this is actually a consideration out of your roadmap and as to how you're going to deal with that.
Thank you.
On the question of certification, depending on what certification you do have, the short answer, by the end of 2020, if you want to still compete in the market, then the short answer is yes, you need to get certification in ITIL 4. And we're going to answer these a little bit later along the way, but just a quick answer for you. At the foundation level, you need to retake the exam. At the intermediate level, in other words, if you are certified at life cycle or capability or MELC and so on, there is a transition, there is a bridge, and we're going to see this a little bit later in the presentation.
All right, very good. No other questions. Thank you.
So I'm sure most of the audience, if not all the audience, have heard the term Agile and Lean and DevOps and Six Sigma and all of this good stuff, SIAM, TRIM, and I can go on and on and on, TOGAF, etc. Right? Well, each one of these, it's like you go to a doctor. Your general practitioner is not a subject matter expert in neurosurgery, right? So you have to go to a neurosurgeon instead. It's the same kind of concept. Each one of these topics and or best practices specializes in a certain area. So Lean, as you all know, to minimize waste. Agile, to do a quick job, and you can follow different models like Scrum or pair programming or whatever other model that you want to follow in order to build incrementally without waiting forever for the project to get done, and to support and to enable business value on an ongoing basis. DevOps is to bridge the gap and to change the cultural approach as well as the technical approach between the development and the operational cycle, and of course ITIL and ITIL service life cycle and ITIL service value chain, as we're going to see shortly. So if you take a step back, as you see in that little diagram, each one of these have a little bit more or less knowledge level whether it's in governance or in process or in architecture or whatever the case. Not only that, you cannot do everything that you want to do following Lean alone, or following Agile alone, or following SIAM alone. In order to have a highly mature IT environment, you need to have a combination of a number of different best practices in place. So which one? I don't know. I have to live with you for anywhere from 3 weeks to 3 months, depending on the size and the complexity of your organization. And then I'll tell you, you know what? Here's the combination that you need to have in place, right? But that's the bottom line. You need to have a sort of combination of best practices in place to get the job done. ITIL alone is not going to do it. Agile alone is not going to do it. TOGAF alone is not going to do it, and so on and so forth. This is why you really need to have a good understanding as to how they work and what are the benefits that they bring to the picture, and how ITIL 4 will elevate this benefit to the business. So now with ITIL 4 being introduced, you notice that the language, for those of you who are familiar and or certified in ITIL, you notice that the language is changing. Now we're not talking about a service life cycle. We're going to talk about service value system and a service value chain and different dimensions and different principles, different practices. We're not just talking about life cycle processes and functions anymore. All right. So the value system is basically end-to-end from opportunity and or demand all the way to value. So in that diagram that you see, you need to work following a system, right? Again, end-to-end, following all of these different components, all of these different activities from opportunity all the way to the delivery of the value. And it doesn't stop there. A little bit later on, you're going to see that there is also a loop back from under continual improvement to improve the overall situation and maybe generate additional what we call input, but now it's an opportunity and or demand, an opportunity that you can create from improvement and or a demand that can come in from your customers and partners. Of course, there will be the service value chain that includes a number of items, and we're going to see this in a little bit later. Governance absolutely required, and of course there will be some guiding principles to be concerned about that. So if we start breaking these different pieces, the service value chain, as you see on the left side of the screen, this is an operating model that takes it again from demand to value. But now the value chain, within the heart of this diagram, from engage to product and services. So we have a demand of some sort, we bring it in, we engage, in quote, service management, and in service management, we're going to do obtain and build, design and transition, deliver and support, and we're going to generate a product and or services that should provide business value. As a result of that, there is improvement activities that we're going to invoke, and that the cycle now continues back to demand. If you take a look at the 4 dimensions that we have on the right-hand side, these 4 dimensions, many of you already know them as people, process, products, and partners. Well, still within the same context, also we used to call them the 4 Ps of service design. So these are organization and people. We used to call it people. Information and technology. We used to call it products because this is where we had tools and technologies. Partners and suppliers. We used to call them partners. Value streams and processes. We used to call them processes. So again, it's the same mindset, but the terminology changed a little bit. And that broke it down to a number of different, as we call them, factors, political factors, economical factors, technological factors, legal factors. At a high level, you have social factors versus environmental factors. So here we're starting to get a little bit more philosophical about the discussion but for the sake of time, we'll leave it at that. The 4 items, as we know them as the 4 P's of service design in the version 2011, are the same as we call here the 4 dimensions model: people, process, products, and partners. The guiding principles. So if anybody has taken service practitioner, ITIL practitioner certification, this slide used to be part of the ITIL practitioner certification. And basically, this is, if you take a closer look at it, this is pretty much relevant to implementation exercises. So as you're going to implement and or introduce, whether it's going to be a service or a product or service management or ITIL or any other project or program, you need to focus on value. You need to start where you are. Don't reinvent the wheel. Figure out what is your current state and what you can use. You can start from where you are. Then you can progress iteratively. So in progress iteratively, just to give you a high level example very quickly, you can do an agile model in there depending on what is it that you are introducing. Item 4, collaborate and promote. Item 5, think and work holistically. You cannot work only on one item, ignoring everything else. Even if you're going to be working within an agile, mindset, you're going to still have to remember your product backlog items, right? So even though you're working on one right now, you need to keep in mind what's coming. So think and work holistically. Keep it simple, and at the end of the day, optimize and automate. The continual improvement consideration is always going to be in mind. So please keep that as you are introducing, keep that in mind. So for those of you who are familiar with the ITIL processes, now they call them ITIL management practices. So general management practices, things as an example associated with architecture management, portfolio management, financial management. So if you take a closer look, and by the way, you notice the number 34. It's not 26 or 27 anymore. So there is a considerable addition here, almost, let me see, 8, another 8, right? If you take a look at project management, they added workforce and talent management, they added architectural management, they added risk management was there but was embedded. So this is considered an addition as well. In service management practices, business analysis was added. They changed change management name to change control. They separated service asset and configuration management to configuration management and IT asset management. Let's see, the rest of it on this side is pretty much, the rest is the same. Technical management practices, release and deployment is now called deployment because they separated them from each other. So they separated release and deployment to release by itself and deployment by itself. Infrastructure and platform management, that's newly introduced. Software development and management, that's newly introduced as well. So these used to be discussions under functional areas in the service life cycle model, but now they're added as practices. And not just that, they changed the scope of some of the work involved in there as well. So as you can see, from 26 to 34, 8 additional items, plus few that are modified from the service life cycle that we've known in the past. You also notice that, as I mentioned, they eliminated the life cycle mindset and they brought it into, it's almost like you grow, as the gentleman says in Train the Trainer session, it's almost like when you go groceries and you're trying to put things that kind of are similar in the same kind of bag. So you have service management all together, general management practices all together, technical management all together, but there is no more service life cycle model that we have seen. It was replaced by the service value stream and the service value chain. This is a little bit more refined delta, if you wish, between V3 2011 and 4. And as you can see, some of the same stuff that I just talked about in terms of the additional processes and the change in the name, the change in processes themselves, the guiding principles that were introduced, the 4 Ps that I talked about, the life cycle versus value system. So this kind of a quick snapshot on these different areas. Tim, do you have any questions?
I do, and I appreciate that you've stopped on the time. With all of the, I think this question branches from a slide that you had up a little while ago. With all of the items in today's world in terms of ITIL and agility, agile project management, and DevOps and all those types of things, is there, I think this is a tough question for you, Nasser, I don't know if it is or not, is there one of those that you think is the best track for a career? I mean, obviously, I'm speaking for this person. Obviously, working in IT, they can't go get educated this year on all those. Is there anything from a career perspective that you like best? Like, this is priority one in terms of your education out of all those?
So from a career perspective, I don't want to give the wrong advice, but it depends, number one, what you're doing today and what you want to do tomorrow. So if you want to grow up to be a consultant who would like to command hundreds of dollars a day, or you want to break the dollar barrier of $1,000 per diem a day, then you're going to have to stack up on certifications. In other words, you need to be an ITIL expert, you need to be an Agile expert, you need to be a Lean or a Six Sigma black belt, you need to be a DevOps master, and so on. If we are looking at, I'm kind of a junior to intermediate type of skill set, and I want to be able to find a better job, or I want to be able to get into and stay in an organization, where I can make a difference, ITIL, in terms of priorities, at least from my point of view, you would need to have ITIL, you would need to have next DevOps, and you would need to have third Agile Scrum, even if you get them at foundational level certifications. But that is going to set the differentiation between you and the rest of the crowd. Let me tell you a personal example. I have a nephew. He graduated with honors from Ottawa University with a bachelor and business bachelor, and he did supply chain. And he waited and waited and waited, until he gets hired. And of course, not waiting, sitting doing nothing. I mean, he was actively trying to look for something that fit his expertise, and for a couple of years was nothing. One day I said, you know what, here is a pocket guide. I want you to read it, and you come back to me and you tell me what you learned from it. So I gave him an ITIL pocket guide. He came back a couple of days later, and he almost literally restated the entire pocket guide. I said, here's an exam voucher, go do the exam. And then he did the same thing for another, and the same thing for another. So he pretty much got the capability life cycle under ITIL 2011. A week later, he got a job. He was, at the time, 24 years old. He got into a consultant position without naming names, the first company. The second company, they kind of snatched him, and he went with them. The third company was Deloitte. They had him as, sorry, not Deloitte, it was EY. They hired him as an ITSM solution director at 26 years old. And eventually he left because now he can pick and choose what he wants, where he wants, how much he wants, and so on. So this is kind of a quick story. I mean, it gives you in IT today, there is a specific combination of certification that you must have if you want to succeed in the industry and if you want to go places. Today, if you're not highly technical. And what I mean by highly technical, there are people, as an example, who are technical gurus in cloud. Yeah, it would be nice to have, but you're not the cloud kind of guy, or you're not the security kind of guy. So if you are into IT service management, generally speaking, you're going to need ITIL, you're going to need DevOps, you're going to need Agile. If you're going to replace DevOps or Agile, replace it with Lean or with Six Sigma. SIAM and TRIM and all of the rest of the stuff, don't worry about it. There is no traction for it. My 2 cents worth.
I hope that person likes the answer. I think it's an excellent answer to a difficult question, and I do have another question. Does the name change from change management to change control imply that a lesser extent of involvement is executed from a dev to a prod deployment, now focusing on the introduction of a deployment into production?
Yes, the short answer is yes. Before that, we used to do change management end-to-end. There was heavy emphasis on it, but unfortunately, the way it was introduced, in many cases, it was not introduced properly, and it started to generate a lot of bottlenecks within almost every organization where it was implemented. It doesn't mean that the concept was not working. It means that the implementation was wrong. And one of the Agile manifesto items is that, or at least translate to, that you don't want to be choked by the process. You don't want the process to cause you that bottleneck. And unfortunately, that's what happened. So changing from change management to change control is exactly that, to facilitate that.
Excellent. Thank you. We're out of questions for the moment. Thanks.
All right. So going back or continuing the discussion on certification and so on, who would need the certification? Who would need the education? And by the way, there are many different certifications, as we're going to see, but you have to decide, is it only the staff or the manager or the customer or the supplier? If I'm looking at it from my point of view as an outsider, then I would say everyone. If you're looking at it internally as a manager or a director, then you have to prioritize who needs to do what and when. Having said that, on the same token, if you have someone who's accountable or responsible for a project, they also need to be certified at the appropriate level. So this is the current certification. I didn't put this there to rehash the existing stuff. The whole concept is that we're going to talk about 4, right? But notice the second main bullet, transition to 4 is a gradual process, okay? So this is how it looks today. Transition to 4 is not going to get done until mid-2020, if not late 2020. In terms of the certification today, from an ITIL 4 point of view and or from a transition between 3 and 4 point of view, the orange one, or the one that says A, this is a prerequisite for everything else and needs to be taken. It doesn't matter if you have the V3 one or not. You still need to take the ITIL V4 foundation level. Now, if you are certified at a number of intermediates, so let's go back here for a second. If you are certified in the blue cycle, in the red cycle, if you are an expert, then there is a combination as to what you can do. So all the ones associated with B, or the green ones, this is going to take you towards managing professional and strategic leader. You're going to need these to capture or to be qualified to do the ITIL master. The blue ones, as we call it, ITIL strategist. So even if today you have all the green ones, you still need the dark blue one in order to achieve managing professional. And by the way, managing professional is a bridge exam, or eventually will be a bridge exam for those who are experts today and they want to be experts or masters tomorrow. The pinkish one or the purplish one, letter E, ITIL master, they still, as usual, they're always been confused about this one, and they're going to continue to be confused about it. But, later details at a later stage. So this is on the certification portion. For the foundation level, everybody needs to be certified at foundation. But I am certified today at V3. Yeah, at V3, but not at V4. You need to redo it at V4. And then if you already are an expert in V3, you need to do the green and the dark blue. So all the green, that is already transferable because you already have credits for it. What's new that you need to take, because it does not exist today, is the dark blue or letter C. And then this will enable you to do the managing professional in order to become a master. So this is the same discussion. I'm just starting, or I do have a V3. You notice that both of them says take the new ITIL 4. The dark blue saying I have few intermediate ones. Well, again, if you have up to 17, or if you don't have 17, then you should continue with your current V3 certification, because you will not have intermediate level until mid of this year or end of this year. So if you are going on the path to get certified in intermediate V3, continue to do that. If you already are an expert, then you need, again, when available, to do that professional transitional model or the burgundy box at the top left in order to enable you become eventually an ITIL master. And again, the master here is to be determined. We're not sure when is the situation. There is quite a bit of information that you can capture from ProTech. Please communicate with Tim and his team, and they will be more than happy to provide you with all the information relevant to the certification or to the bridge, or if you want just an awareness or an overview or whatever the case may be.
I just want to add, we have 3 rounds of those 4 courses scheduled this year, April, over the summer, and then in the fall. There are no current questions, so we still have a moment or two until we'll wrap up. One other thing that I want to mention is that in addition to those classes that we have, we also have a couple of upcoming webinars that I just wanted to announce in case you might be interested. There's a Tableau webinar coming up in February, and in March we have a webinar on building visualizations in web intelligence. So those coming up for webinars. Again, as Nasser had that slide up for classes, we've got 3 rounds of those coming up as well. Our thanks for those of you that came. It looks like almost everybody stayed until the end. We greatly appreciate it. Nasser, there are still no questions, so if you have any closing comments yourself.
Thank you everyone for attending, really. And I have a great passion for this. I've been doing best practices for a long time, and believe me when I tell you, no one best practice will do it alone. So today we're talking about ITIL. Tomorrow we may be talking about TOGAF or potentially whatever other best practice. Something to keep in mind. But today ITIL is the leading best practice in the industry from an IT service management perspective, and it will be needed, will continue to be needed. So if anything that you are planning for at a personal or professional level, I strongly suggest that you pay attention to it, because it's almost the silent mandatory requirement on your CV for a job in the IT industry. I'll leave it at that, and I'll wish you all a very pleasant afternoon. God bless.
Thank you very much, Nasser. Appreciate it. You have a great day, and thank you all again for coming. Take care.